Hello! Today I would like to share with y'all a video of my 2020 reading wrap-up. So all of the books that I read this year. In the past I have done more consistent updates like monthly reading wrap-ups, but I just did not do that this year. So at the very beginning of the year I had some goals. And they were generally to focus on reading longer books and not have so much pressure on reading a large quantity of books. And part of there's a lot of ways that I think social media and YouTube had been affecting what I was doing in my life. And one of those things is with reading wrap-ups, especially monthly reading wrap-ups, the quantity of books is important for people who are successful in doing like BookTube, because people generally want to hear about more books. So, and like seeing like a huge stack of books is something that you'd rather want to click on than somebody who's read half of a book. So I wanted to actively try to work against that and read less books. So I actually set my goal for quantity of books read at I think 20. Let me look. Yes, I set the goal at 20. Usually I would set it at 40 and usually I'd read around 50 or 52. So I wanted to get away from that and start reading a little bit slower and enjoy myself a little bit more. So that was the goal. So the first book I read was The Fellowship of the Ring. I had never read the Lord of the Rings series, and so I wanted to give that a shot. And I had just read The Hobbit earlier last year before reading this, so I thought I would give this a shot. And I really did enjoy The Fellowship of the Ring quite a lot. I have a video about this one, so I won't go into great detail. The second book that I read this year was The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and I also did a video about this, photographing it and all that. And I also very much enjoyed this book. And some of what I'm thinking about my enjoyment level is actually the way that I set the goal for this year was, to really enjoy the reading process instead of being so judgmental about books, I feel like. Although there are plenty of books to be judgmental about. Don't worry. The next book that I have is The Two Towers. I took a break in between The Fellowship and The Two Towers to read a different book, just to give myself a break. And then I went back into it and I read this. This was okay. I also have a full review about this book, so you can watch that if you would like. And then, unfortunately, I still don't have a copy of Return of the King, so I have not yet read that. I will probably try to find it on my local library system. So the next book I read was a short one to give myself a break again, and it was So Long and Thanks for All the Fish by Douglas Adams. This was short and cute and fun, and I don't really have that much to complain about with it. That's about it. Not that many long-lasting feelings on this one either. The next book that I read was Dorcai, and this is by Gordon R. Dickson. So this was an impulse buy at a thrift store, kind of prompted by my fiance because of the description on the back. It's very like dramatic, and it looks like a fun read, right? It's actually quite long too, which is kind of, I've been reading a lot of double feature sci-fis recently where the stories are quite short. They're like 150 pages. And so this is, I'm surprised it's so long, actually. Because I don't remember there being that like a ton of content in this, to be perfectly honest. This is one of those classic like male fantasy sci-fis. It's not good. This one was a stinker, but I love reading old sci-fi for entertainment value, and because there might be some fun things in it, but usually they're bad. So I had also been making an effort to try to review books early on, and I did review quite a lot of books, and then a few things happened. I moved to a new house, and then there was a pandemic like a month later that got here and affected us directly. And so then things started to kind of fall apart in terms of goals. But here you can see all of the dog earring notes for maybe something ridiculous that I saw, or some sort of note in terms of plot, something to help with the review. So this is a great one-line chunk of my review of this book that will illustrate to you my feelings on it. If you've ever watched a video review dissecting one of Onision's books, reading this was a similar experience to that. This is Idaho by Emily Reskovich, and this is an incredibly beautifully written book, but it is very haunting in terms of content. The content is something that I would not tend to read because it's about like murder and like very heavy topics, murder and missing persons and stuff like that. Really things that I have absolutely no interest in. I am not one of those true crime people. It disgusts me. This book was disgusting. I hated the gruesome aspects of it, but it is incredibly well written, to the point that this is like one of my favorite books that I read this year. I think I need to reread it despite all of the horrible stuff in it, because I just think it can teach me a lot about how to write very effectively. The next book I read was Squirrel Seeks Chipmunk by David Sedaris, and I hated this. It is grotesque for no reason. I found no pleasure and no this just was not for me in any way. I hated it. And that's that. The next book that I read was Snow, and this was very good. This took me a very long time to read. I was reading this at the beginning of the pandemic, I feel like. Basically the whole month of March I read this book. And so the like sense of isolation and desolation kind of things going on in here were, I feel like, similar to how I was feeling at the time. So but anyway, it is a very interesting sneak peek at a town, and like the goings on within the town, the different like characters, people there. It kind of reminds me of like Cannery Row in a weird way. But yeah, anyway, it's a Turkish novel, so interesting. I had been recommended this for a long time, and it's kind of big, so I was a little bit worried about it, and I knew that it was kind of like heavy topic, so I didn't exactly know if I wanted to get into that, but I'm glad I did. Then, for a break on that, I decided to read a children's book, Time and the Clock Mice, etc., by Peter Dickinson. And this was a pretty cute book. It is about a big clock and the mice that live within it. They're like special, intelligent mice, and I thought it was kind of fun. To me, it really read like an older man who wanted to make a story for his like grandchildren, and I think that's what I liked a lot about it. Because it has like little, I don't know, like the chapters are broken up by like this, so like third essay on mice, Each one is kind of like that. So there's like first essay on cats and stuff like that. And then you get to learn a little bit about clocks, and I thought it was fun. It was a nice break from reading more heavy stuff. Then I read The Blue Flower. This is by Penelope Fitzgerald. This is a very strange historical piece about, and by that I mean it's based on like historical events or people, I guess. It has like some journal excerpts in it. But really it's about this guy, who is it again? It's like somebody historically important that I don't know about. Novalis, who goes by Fritz, I think, in this book. Anyway, he like falls in love with this girl who's kind of dull, like she doesn't really do anything, and then it just kind of ends tragically and like in a hollow way. It's a very strange book. I didn't enjoy it. This is when I hit a slump because I just felt so occupied with all of the terrible stuff in the world that I was having a hard time concentrating on reading. And there were many nights, I usually read every single night. There were many nights that I just couldn't read before going to sleep. I just fell asleep. So I was reading Heart of Darkness and The Secret Chair by Joseph Conrad. I'd read Heart of Darkness in high school, and this is the copy that I have from high school. And I wanted to reread it because I thought the language in Heart of Darkness was really beautiful, and I wanted to experience that again. And so, unfortunately, it was a really hard time for me to read at that time, and so I really slogged through this, and I had a lot of times where I was very confused, and I had to reread things just because my mind was so preoccupied. And then a little while later, I read The Secret Chair, and that was fun. It was fun to read that for the first time. If this one is about a ship that oh boy, I don't know if I'm gonna get this all wrong. It's about some people who go to Africa and run into some problems at that point. And then The Secret Chair is about a stowaway, basically a fugitive who has kind of like befriended the captain of a boat, of a ship. I think it's the captain. I don't think I can give a really good review of this because I read this at a bad time. Then I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I really like this book. I didn't realize it was going to be so like page-turnery, YA-y as it was, but I had a nice experience with it. It's kind of like a sci-fi kind of dystopian, but in like a light sense. It's not like that heavy kind of this is a dystopian kind of vibe, and I quite liked this. Yeah, this was a nice experience. A little bit younger than I was expecting it to be. I thought it was going to be like more of an adult book, to be perfectly honest. The next book I read was Maya Angelou, The Heart of a Woman. Sorry if my voice has changed. Matt just got up and I was just talking to him, so I feel like now I have like less of a morning voice. So that's the change. Yes, so I read this installment of Maya Angelou's autobiography. This one is pretty interesting. Okay, so it has to do with some of her time working for Martin Luther King and doing like activism work. And then there's also some that is about her time when she marries a South African activist and her time living in Africa with him. My apologies if you can hear a street sweeper. So the next book that I read was The Living is Easy by Dorothy West. This is a notable book because it is one of a very few books that was published by a Black woman in the 1940s, and it is about Black women. Specifically, the main character has quite a lot of flaws and is quite unlikable, which I think is very interesting to read that perspective. And it's about a woman who was born in the South who is trying to make it in Boston, like upper class Black society. And she will do a lot to keep that going. And she also has a very interesting relationship with her sisters. And she has a very interesting relationship with men. So I quite enjoyed this. It was a very interesting read, and it was a very entertaining read. And I very highly recommend this as just a very interesting snippet and perspective that I would not have had otherwise. The next book that I read was Pride and Prejudice. This is the hard copy that I have, but I did not read this copy. I actually read an audiobook of this. I don't really remember why. I think I was doing some sort of like tedious manual labor, and I wanted to read a book at the same time, and I thought I might as well read Pride and Prejudice because I never had. And to be quite honest, I thought it was very boring. I'm not sure that I really care for Jane Austen, to be completely honest. So I know that this is a very important book for a lot of people, but I just didn't really have... I didn't really care about it very much. I wasn't very invested, I would say. So, yeah. Perhaps if I had read this at the beginning of the year, where I was more intent on really trying to enjoy what I was reading and really take out of what I was reading what I could, maybe I would enjoy it more. But just in comparison with everything else that I read this year, I did not really enjoy this very much. So the next book I do not have a physical copy of because I don't have any physical copies of any Kurt Vonnegut novels at all, which is insane because I absolutely adore Kurt Vonnegut books. I've read quite a lot by now, but the next book that I read was The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, and it was amazing. It was so interesting. It has to do with basically if a person got caught in like a time loop orbit thing, or I don't know, I can't remember what the term was. It's like chrono something, and basically there's some fortune telling kind of aspects. And the idea of having some things that are seen and predetermined, and I don't know, I can't describe it. It's very good though, and it has that very fun, playful side of it that Kurt Vonnegut usually has. Then I read Monument by Lloyd Biggle Jr. This is a science fiction book. This is actually a hardcover, which is kind of interesting for me. I usually don't have hardcovers. So this is about basically a culture, like a space, a different planet culture that is having its initial interactions with society at large, and they have to fight to protect their livelihood and what is important to them in the face of kind of profit making and the pressures of society outside of their planet. So this was quite fun. It was a little bit forgettable, to be completely honest, but it was a fun read, I would say. And it didn't have as much of like the terrible biases that some science fiction can have in it. Compared to other books I've read, this was not like terrible in terms of like representation, I guess. This book I also do not have a physical copy for because I read it as a digital library rental from my local library. And this was More Than This by Patrick Ness. I have read a couple of Patrick Ness's other works and I quite enjoyed them, and so I thought I would try out More Than This because I had put it on my to-read list after hearing a synopsis of it quite some time ago, and I thought I'd take the chance when I saw it available. So this is a young adult science fiction story, and I won't give too much away, but it is... I'll just say that that's what it is. For a while you kind of are thinking about what type of thing might be happening to the characters, and I don't want to let you not have that joy. I didn't enjoy this greatly. I didn't really enjoy the characters that much, and it fell a little bit flat. Again, I think I'm just not enjoying as much stories or novels that are intended for young people because they are dealing with topics that I'm just not dealing with right now. So that's how I feel about kind of YA right now. Although not all of it, just there's some elements that I'm like, this isn't for me, you know? Then I read Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. This is by Daniel L. Everett, and this was a fascinating read. This was recommended by my fiance, and this was a book that he had to read for his linguistics class in college. And I adore linguistics. I love linguistics so much. I almost got a minor in it, if it weren't for some engineering classes that I needed to take to graduate, conflicting with the linguistics classes that I would need to get the minor. So that's really the only reason. But anyway, yes, this is a book about a missionary's experience with the Piraha, something like that. This is a view at looking at a society and a culture that is very unlike our own. And I'm guessing that we're sharing a similar culture in comparison to this. So these are some folks that live on the Amazon, and the part of the idea is like, why are so many missionaries failing at converting these people? And then a look at how their language kind of reveals a bit about their thought processes, and then going into elements of their culture, which are just very, very interesting. I highly recommend this book. This was very, very cool read. It opens your eyes into the different ways that humans can actually be, basically. Then I read A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This is a character heavy or like character based science fiction about a like an AI who's downloaded into a body and is interacting with a girl who, or a woman who in the past had been through like child slave labor kind of experiences, and she had escaped that, And I honestly found that story of the girl who had been struggling to survive and escape from the child slave labor element that she was in. That was what I found very interesting about this story. The kind of like, I don't know, the kind of AI, it's the ship's AI from a long way to a small angry planet. It's that Loveless, who's downloaded into a person or into a body, and she's experiencing being a body instead of being a ship. And I didn't care for that as much. Anyway, this was a good book. I wouldn't like wholly recommend this to everyone, but it was a fun read. The next book is The Last True Story I'll Ever Tell by John Crawford. And this is about a National Guard guy who's been pulled into the war with Iraq, or the war on Iraq, or the war in Iraq, whatever. And so he's recounting stories from that time. And this was horrible. This felt like a necessary read. It was impactful, but it just made me feel disgusting. The way that they are it seems very truthful, to be completely honest. If it just the unpreparedness, the unprofessionalism, the way that they're talking about other people, other women, like other women, and the people there, the civilians there, is not nice to read, and it just, I don't know, it makes you feel bad, like makes you feel sick. So I feel like it was probably necessary for me to read this, but it was like taking medicine, and it was not fun. So after that, I wanted to read something fun, because that was like hell reading that book. And it was also around October, so I decided to read some Goosebumps books. So I read Attack of the Jack-o'-lanterns by R.L. Stine. It's a Goosebumps book. And this was a fun one. They're basically trapped trick-or-treating forever, and that's kind of a fun concept. I felt like the scenery of the neighborhood that they were trick-or-treating in was particularly fun. And I read How to Kill a Monster. I've always adored this cover. I feel like it's very impactful, and I also quite enjoyed this. This is about some kids who go to stay with their grandparents who live in a castle in a swamp, and there's a monster trapped in the house with them. Vampire Breath. This was a book that I never had when I was a child. I had a lot of Goosebumps as a child, and their covers were very impactful on my mind. I didn't read all of them, but I imagined about them quite a lot. And Vampire Breath has a very different cover to me. It's not as colorful, it's different. It's like a character, it's very interesting. And I feel like the actual content and structure of the story is quite different as well. It is about a vampire, and there is some time travel at the same time. Then I read The Secret of the Old Clock, which is the very first Nancy Drew story. It's just a classic Nancy Drew. I feel like most Nancy Drews are pretty similar. There are some that get really crazy. I think especially towards the later series, when they're not the old books, they get kind of wacky. But this one is basically she's on the hunt for a will to try and bring justice to those who think that they're in the will, but are not in the will that is currently available, I guess, of this old guy. The next book I read is actually an Ace double feature science fiction. So we have Planet of Exile. This is what I read first. This is by Ursula K. Le Guin. And this is a very interesting story. This is about two cultures. Well, it's about two cultures and then there's a third also introduced that's very distant. But they are cohabitating this world together. There's the native people on this world, and then there's the travelers who'd settled onto this planet. And the travelers who'd settled onto this planet are having some difficulties adapting to the planet. They're kind of dying out just because they weren't really meant for this world. So these two cultures kind of interact more due to circumstances where they have to fight a common enemy. And also there's some very interesting exploration of seasons and the length of seasons and the lengths of orbits and all of that, which is pretty interesting to think about. I thought this was well written and was quite interesting. Well, hello! I just got back from a brief intermission where we played with our dog, and then we also just took her on a walk. So I'm back now, and I'm ready to go over the last several books of the year. Then I finished reading Nick Hornby's A Long Way Down, which I had started reading kind of quite a bit earlier, and I hadn't really settled into yet. And then I finally plowed through it. This is about 4 people who meet at the top of a building because they are all planning on killing themselves on New Year's Eve, I think. And so it's about how the 4 of them kind of keep each other company and how they kind of try to help solve each other's problems in a way. And yeah, it was fine. It was told from the 4 perspectives, so the 4 different characters each had their time to shine in terms of telling the story. I thought sometimes it was a little bit strange that certain scenes, instead of being shown more as a scene, were just a summary of a scene. Sometimes it did feel like I was just reading a bunch of summaries about what had happened, because that's basically how it was told, was people recounting what had happened. But instead of being a little bit vibrant and in the moment, it did seem like a little bit of a summary sometimes. So this was fine. Then I read the backside of this Planet of Exile double sci-fi book is Mankind Under the Leash by Thomas M. Dish, or however you say that last name. And this was thoroughly entertaining as a read. I was never bored reading this book. This is kind of like a hilariously strange story. It's about mankind. There are 2 kind of main sects now, that there are some beings that are kind of like masters of I don't know, like matter and energy. They're a different type of life form that can kind of structure things differently. They're kind of like gods, and they kind of domesticate and raise humans like their dogs. So the main character's father had written a very influential book that was about, it stretched this dog and domesticated like human analogy quite a lot, and it was influential. And then the main character goes on a journey. It's kind of like a lifelong story about this guy who then ends up fighting against the leash, and the beings who had control over them. So, very weird story. It starts off with all of this like dog terminology, so like kennels and leash and puppy and stuff like that, and it's kind of unnerving, and then things get pretty fucking crazy in this book. So this was a hoot and a half. This was very fun, and despite it being absolutely ridiculous and kind of strange and revealing, this was a very fun read. Somehow I missed this book, so I'm going to insert it in here. After I read The Heart of a Woman, I read Hope, Human and Wild by Bill McKibben. This is a book about it's about kind of the return of wilderness to the northeastern United States after a long time of kind of degradation of the land. And it's also about two societies, one in Brazil and one in India, if I recall correctly. Yes, Kerala, India, and Curitiba, Brazil. And it's about kind of how people have been able to create communities that can live with the earth in a sustainable way, and how those societies function, and kind of what their like the important things are, how they're able to live in a way that isn't exploitative of the earth and its resources. So this was a pretty interesting read. It was a lot shorter than I thought it would be, and it didn't really go into as much depth as I would have hoped it would have gone into. And now we get into the 3 books that I have not finished, but have read parts of and am currently reading. So I'll get into that. So one is this collection of 2 novellas called I Am Death by Gary Amdahl. And this is 2 novellas. One is I Am Death and one is Peasants. So I did read I Am Death. This was about a man who's writing a story about like a mafia boss or a mob boss, and his kind of like obsession and like kind of getting ingrained into that. I didn't really enjoy it very much. I found it quite confusing actually, and I was kind of reading this at the same time as I was very like muddled in my own mind, very overtaken by like world circumstances and like the news and all of that. So maybe I just wasn't in a great headspace to read it. And then I started reading Peasants, which I was more interested in the concept of, and I just haven't finished it. And I think I would need to start it over and reread what I had read because it had been so long. So I've finished the first novella and I haven't finished the second. Then I have also been reading selected short stories of Franz Kafka, and the first story in here that I read was The Judgment, and then I also read The Metamorphosis. So I read The Metamorphosis in high school and I absolutely loved it, and I read it again and it was very, very good again. A solid piece. And so then I had started reading In the Penal Colony, and I didn't get quite so into it, and I started reading something else. So I will continue reading these short stories and finish it eventually. And so the very last thing that I've read so far this year completely is The Blue Atom, which is by Robert Moore Williams. This is a fairly silly science fiction story about a very powerful force or mechanism or power called the Blue Atom, and an ancient great race of beings that had existed before mankind and their use of this power. This story has some pretty disturbing descriptions of native beings of Venus, which I really did not like. That was not the business. And then it also had some pretty strange descriptions of the one female character, Kay McKay, in terms of her being like a very unique woman, just because she was like the only one that this guy knew, basically. So this definitely has some of those bad sci-fi tropes, but it was a pretty interesting story. It got me towards the middle. I started to get kind of interested into it, and then the ending was okay, not super satisfying. So then the other side of this is The Void Beyond and Other Stories. This is also by Robert Moore Williams, which is kind of interesting for one of these double novel books. So I've read The Void Beyond, which is the first short story in this collection, and I read that this morning, and it was pretty fun. It's about a woman who is a stowaway on a ship going to Pluto, and apparently space sickness is something that strikes spacemen, and is very difficult to deal with, and it is basically impossible for women to deal with, but she is on the ship and she's there to prove them wrong. I thought this one kind of had like a little bit of a twist in that, based on his other work, I thought he was very he has this tone of like basic, well, I don't know, the treatment of women in these works is not great. It's pretty terrible. But then there's like the one woman who's like the exemplary example of women. So, you know, take whatever you want from that. And then there are some more stories that I've not yet read, so I'm not finished with this one yet. And that is it. That is what I read this year, I believe. I don't think I'm missing anything. And overall, I think it's pretty successful. There was about a month span of time where I was really, really disenchanted, I guess, is that a word, with reading. I was not interested in it. I didn't have the space in my mind for it, and that was due to all of the stress of the world with the pandemic and other news. And then, you know, then we got through it, despite things still being pretty crazy. The reading happened again. So for my reading goals and thoughts for next year, I think I'm just gonna keep on powering through, reading kind of as I have been towards the second half of the year, kind of picking up whatever I wanted to and reading that for fun. I might try and pick up some more challenging, longer, maybe things that I'm not as inclined to pick up on a whim, just to make sure that I'm still stretching myself and expanding my mind and all that. But it is less of a extreme focus as it was in the beginning of the year. So, yes, that is all. I hope you enjoyed this, and thanks for watching.